All right, today we are jumping headfirst into the wild, often brutal, and totally transformative story of how the United States was born. Seriously, it's a saga of rebellion, crazy invention, relentless expansion, and a nation that was pretty much constantly at war with itself over what it was even supposed to be.
I mean, think about it. How in the world did a bunch of rebellious colonies, just kind of clinging to the edge of a massive continent, become the global superpower we see today? It's a huge question. And to even begin to answer it, we've got to go way, way back to the very beginning.
Okay, so first up, from colonies to revolution. Before the United States was even a glimmer in anyone's eye, you had more than 150 years of British colonial rule. In this period, it wasn't just about people setting up farms and towns. No, something else was happening. People were building a whole new identity, one that would eventually lead to a massive, violent split from the mother country.
You know, this timeline really helps you grasp just how long this colonial period was. It all kicks off in 1607 with Jamestown, a pretty miserable, swampy settlement, honestly. Then you get the Pilgrims up at Plymouth, and for more than 100 years, these colonies are just doing their own thing, developing their own flavor. But look at that last date, 1763. That's the one. That's the game changer. The French and Indian War ends, and while Britain won, it cost a fortune. And Britain's plan to pay off that debt? Well, that's what lit the fuse of the revolution.
So to pay for that incredibly expensive war, what does Britain do? It decides to tax the American colonies. Now, for the colonists, this wasn't really just about the money. Not at all. It was about the principle of the thing. They saw themselves as British subjects with all the rights that came with it. And that's where you get this incredible rallying cry, no taxation without representation. The idea was simple, but powerful. You cannot tax us if we don't have a voice in your government. Period.
And man, things escalated quickly. You can see it happen step by step. First, boom, the Stamp Act. They start taxing everything on paper, from your newspaper to a deck of cards, and people rioted. Then, the tension just boils over into the Boston Massacre. A few years later, in protest of a tax on tea, colonists pull off the Boston Tea Party, dumping a literal fortune in tea into the harbor. Parliament's reaction? They passed what the colonists called the Intolerable Acts, basically shutting down Boston's entire economy. At that point, there was no turning back. War was coming.
So, winning the war, that was one thing. A huge thing, obviously. But what came next was, in some ways, even harder. Creating a country from scratch.
You have to picture this. The revolution is won. Hooray! But now what? The brand new United States was teetering on the edge of complete collapse. The economy was a mess, the states were all fighting with each other, and the government they'd created was, frankly, a joke. It was way too weak to do anything. The victory must have felt pretty hollow because the future looked incredibly uncertain.
Yeah, their first shot at a government was something called the Articles of Confederation, and it was a mess. You can see the comparison here. It was designed to be weak on purpose. Everyone was terrified of a strong central government. So the states had all the power, and the national government couldn't even collect taxes. This blew up in their faces with Shays' Rebellion, when a bunch of angry farmers started an uprising, and the government was powerless to stop it. That was the wake-up call. The solution? The Constitution, a completely radical new design for a strong but balanced federal government. And the real genius of the Constitution was this brand new idea of checks and balances. They split the power into three branches. You have Congress, the legislative branch, they make the laws. You have the president, the executive, who enforces the laws. And you have the Supreme Court, the judicial, which interprets the laws. The key is each branch can put a check on the others. It was all designed to make sure no one person, no one part of the government could ever become a tyrant like the king they just fought a war to get rid of.
Okay, so with a new, stronger government finally in place, the nation's focus shifted. All eyes turned west. And this next era was all about explosive growth and this powerful, almost religious belief that the entire continent was theirs for the taking. And that belief, it had a name: Manifest Destiny. This was the idea in the 19th century that the United States was literally destined, by God they believed, to expand all the way across North America. And it wasn't just about getting more land. It was seen as a duty to spread American democracy and capitalism, whether the people already living on that land wanted it or not. The first absolutely massive step in that direction came in 1803. This is what might be the single greatest real estate deal in all of history. President Thomas Jefferson buys the entire Louisiana territory from Napoleon's France. I mean, just look at that. It literally doubled the size of the country overnight. An enormous frontier was suddenly open for the taking.
But here's the thing. The dream of the West was one thing.
The reality was often a complete nightmare. The journey itself was brutal. You had pioneers facing deadly diseases like cholera. The weather could be completely unforgiving. And of course, there was growing conflict with the Native American tribes whose land they were crossing into. Horrifying stories like the Donner Party, who famously had to resort to cannibalism to survive, really show you just how dangerous this journey was.
And this number shows the truly devastating human cost of manifest destiny. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 led to the forced relocation of tens of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral homes in the Southeast. That forced march became known as the Trail of Tears, and it was nothing short of a humanitarian catastrophe. Around 15,000 men, women, and children died along the way.
You see, as America kept pushing west, it could not escape its original fatal flaw. Every single time a new territory was added, it forced this toxic, impossible question: would it be a free state or a slave state? And that single question would eventually tear the nation completely in two.
So when the Civil War finally broke out, the Union and the North had some massive advantages. Just look at this. The North had way more people to pull soldiers from. It had way more factories to make guns and supplies, and it had this huge railroad network to move troops and equipment, while the South's was really limited. I mean, on paper, it looks like a total mismatch.
But that war didn't just happen overnight. The road to it was paved with decades and decades of failed political deals. You had the Missouri Compromise in 1820, the Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Each one was just a desperate attempt to kick the can down the road, to balance the number of slave and free states. They were just temporary fixes, and things like Bleeding Kansas, where pro- and anti-slavery settlers literally fought their own mini-civil war, proved that compromise was dead.
The last straw? It was the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. His whole platform was about stopping the spread of slavery into those new Western territories. And for the South, that was a direct threat to their entire way of life, their economy, everything. So South Carolina seceded from the Union. Other states quickly followed, and the nation plunged headfirst into its bloodiest war.
Now, the end of the war brought on a new, absolutely massive challenge. How do you rebuild a country that just tore itself apart? And, just as importantly, how do you integrate 4 million newly freed people into the life of the nation? This period, called Reconstruction, was going to be the ultimate test of America's commitment to its own founding ideals.
So in 1865, the guns finally fell silent. The Union was saved. But the cost was just staggering. Over 600,000 American lives lost. That's more than in all other American wars combined. The country was one piece again, but it was deeply, deeply scarred.
And in this incredible burst of change right after the war, 3 amendments were added to the Constitution that completely rewrote the rules. The 13th Amendment, slavery is abolished forever. The 14th, citizenship and equal protection for everyone born here. And the 15th, the right to vote cannot be denied based on race. On paper, this was a second American Revolution.
But that commitment, it didn't last. A shady backroom political deal in 1877, known as the Compromise of 1877, just ended the whole thing. The federal troops who had been in the South protecting the rights of black citizens, they were pulled out. Reconstruction was over. And that abandonment left the promise of equality completely unfulfilled for almost another 100 years. It kicked off the long, dark era of Jim Crow segregation and voter suppression.
And that brings us to this final, crucial question. The Civil War settled one thing, that America would be one single nation. But the struggle over what that nation actually stands for, over who really gets to be included in we the people, that fight was really just beginning. And the echoes of this entire history, of all these conflicts, well, how do you think they're still shaping the United States today?